To stay competitive in the global market, Malaysia must maintain a healthy and competitive business environment. Anti-competitive behaviors are unwelcomed because it hurts businesses, consumers, and consequently the nation's economy. Cartels operate secretly and almost never surface. But the effects will be felt by consumers. Two or more businesses collude together as a cartel in a bid-rigging act or price-fixing of goods and services. The result is hike in prices that consumers are forced to pay. Being a dominant or a monopoly in the market is all right. But abuse of dominant position is not. Refusing to supply or tying and bundling in a way that hurts smaller businesses are examples of abuse of dominant position. These conducts not only harm the consumers, it also discourages entrance of new players or foreclose the market. Anti-competitive behaviors must be curbed. To address these issues, the Competition Act 2010 was enacted to promote economic development by promoting and protecting processes of competition, and in turn protecting consumers. The process of competition will encourage efficiency, innovation, and entrepreneurship on businesses. As a result, the market will provide competitive prices, improvement in the quality of products and services, and wider choices for consumers, advancing the growth of Malaysia's economy. The Competition Commission will champion the Competition Act as enforcer and advocator. As enforcer, the Commission wants businesses to compete on the merit. At the same time, it carries out the role of advocator so that players will correct their market behavior. In its unique position as a quasi-judicial body, the Commission has the power to penalize those infringing the Act. To date, the Commission has imposed millions of ringgit in penalty amount against target enterprises, including major corporate bodies in the country. The Commission supports competitive business environment and urges others to do the same. While cartels are hard to detect, members of the cartel may approach the Commission to report, admit, and assist with investigation. Leniency officers may extend a total waiver of penalty to those who come forward. The Commission also issues guidelines relevant to the enforcement of the competition laws, as well as conduct market reviews. The Commission's e-learning modules will give businesses the right knowledge on good business conduct. Malaysia can maintain its ranks as a strong global player backed by a healthy and competitive market environment. Competition in the market encourages enterprises to remain innovative and responsive, while consumers can enjoy great value in goods and services, building a robust national economy. Promoting competition, protecting you. To stay competitive in the global market, Malaysia must maintain a healthy and competitive business environment. Anti-competitive behaviors are unwelcomed because it hurts businesses, consumers, and consequently the nation's economy. Cartels operate secretly and almost never surface. But the effects will be felt by consumers. Two or more businesses collude together as a cartel in a bid-rigging act or price-fixing of goods and services. The result is hike in prices that consumers are forced to pay. Being a dominant or a monopoly in the market is all right. But abuse of dominant position is not. Refusing to supply or tying and bundling in a way that hurts smaller businesses are examples of abuse of dominant position. These conducts not only harm the consumers, it also discourages entrance of new players or foreclose the market. Anti-competitive behaviors must be curbed. To address these issues, the Competition Act 2010 was enacted to promote economic development by promoting and protecting processes of competition, and in turn protecting consumers. The process of competition will encourage efficiency, innovation and entrepreneurship on businesses. As a result, the market will provide competitive prices, improvement in the quality of products and services, and wider choices for consumers, advancing the growth of Malaysia's economy. The Competition Commission will champion the Competition Act as enforcer and advocator. As enforcer, the Commission wants businesses to compete on the merit. At the same time, it carries out the role of advocator so that players will correct their market behavior. In its unique position as a quasi-judicial body, the Commission has the power to penalize those infringing the Act. To date, the Commission has imposed millions of ringgit in penalty amount against target enterprises, including major corporate bodies in the country. The Commission supports competitive business environment and urges others to do the same. While cartels are hard to detect, members of the cartel may approach the Commission to report, admit, and assist with investigation. Leniency officers may extend a total waiver of penalty to those who come forward. The Commission also issues guidelines relevant to the enforcement of the competition laws, as well as conduct market reviews. The Commission's e-learning modules will give businesses the right knowledge on good business conduct. Malaysia can maintain its ranks as a strong global player backed by a healthy and competitive market environment. Competition in the market encourages enterprises to remain innovative and responsive, while consumers can enjoy great value in goods and services, building a robust national economy. Promoting competition, protecting you.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome back everyone to the afternoon session. We are launching the OECD reports for this session. I'm Tivia. Here we are focusing on the OECD competition assessment reviews of the logistics sector in Malaysia and the OECD competitive Neutrality reviews for small package delivery services in Malaysia. We are going live on both YouTube and Facebook page, so please feel free to share it on your social media platforms as well. Remember to follow the MyCC on social media platforms as well. To kickstart the event, I would like to invite Mr. Antonio Gomez, Deputy Director, Directorate Financial and Enterprise Affairs, OECD, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Antonio.
Iskander Ismail, Mr. Louis Tekeong, colleagues from the Malaysia Competition Commission, ASEAN Secretary, ASEAN Experts Group on Competition, and OECD, Selamat Petang. I am pleased to join you today for the launch of Malaysia's competition assessment and competitive neutrality reports, as well as to have this opportunity to thank Malaysian counterparts for the excellent cooperation throughout this exercise. The reports we launched today include a competition assessment of rules and regulations in the logistics sector, and an assessment of competitive neutrality in the small package delivery services in Malaysia. These two reports form part of a Fostering Competition in ASEAN project, a 3-year program that brought together the OECD and all ASEAN member states with the support of the UK government to strengthen competition policy in ASEAN logistics and delivery industries, consistent with the ASEAN Competition Action Plan 2016-2025. I am pleased to note that 2 weeks ago, we jointly launched with the economic ministers of the ASEAN member states 2 regional reports that analyze common competition challenges and recommendations across ASEAN in the logistics sector. This landmark event underscored ASEAN's continued commitment to develop an efficient logistics sector to support the bloc's post-pandemic economic growth and recovery. To help set the scene for today's discussions, I would like to provide a few highlights from the 2 reports on Malaysia. The reports recognize the significant strides that Malaysia has made in improving the competitiveness of its logistics sector, in line with the plan to position the country as a regional logistics hub and a gateway to ASEAN. Malaysia's liner shipping connections with other countries have significantly improved since 2006, suggesting the country's integration in global shipping networks. Malaysia has a developed port sector with 2 of its ports, Port Klang and the port of Tanjung Pelepas, ranked 12 and 18 worldwide in terms of throughput. In 2017, the government launched the Digital Free Trade Zone, which provides an e-fulfillment hub that provides warehousing, order processing, and delivery services to help SMEs export their goods. Unfortunately, these advances have not insulated Malaysia from the economic impacts of the ongoing pandemic. Global disruptions to trade and production have affected logistics activities and in turn, investments and trade. Rising infections and the extension of lockdown measures in 2021 affected trade and production, leading the Asian Development Bank to lower Malaysia's growth forecasts for the year. By streamlining its logistics sector, Malaysia can help drive further growth of its logistics and e-commerce industries, and at the same time soften the impacts of COVID on investment and trade. And this will support and perhaps accelerate the country's economic recovery. To build on this progress, the OECD reports include 78 recommendations on issues affecting competition dynamics in Malaysia, such as rules that may limit market entry, rules that may limit the ability of suppliers to compete, or rules granting preferential treatment only to certain companies, such as state-owned enterprises. For example, in relation to roads transport, the competition assessment reports recommends removing the authority's power to set freight rates, in line with the current practice where rates are determined by the market. This will allow lower cost suppliers to enter the market and provide a wider range of options to consumers and increase supply. For bonded warehouses, we recommend simplifying requirements for applicants that are requesting a license to reduce costs and facilitate market entry. This will lower the cost of entry and encourage more firms to compete in the market. Finally, in our report on competitive neutrality, we recommend ensuring that regulated rates for universal service reflect the actual costs of the universal service licensee and take into account any other cross-subsidization or other public funds, grants, or subsidies. This will ensure a level playing field for different firms in the market. We do hope that these reports serve to strengthen the OECD's long-standing relationship with Malaysia. Just last month, the OECD launched the OECD Economic Survey of Malaysia with Minister Dato Sri Mustafa Mohammed. We also would like to commend MyCC for the launch of its market review of selected transportation sectors in Malaysia, port logistics ecosystem, and motor vehicles warranty, which we believe complements well the OECD reports. In closing, I would like to thank MyCC and the Malaysian government for our close cooperation in the development of these two reports, and to recognize the contributions of the public and private stakeholders and the ASEAN Secretariat. I would also like to thank the UK government via the ASEAN Economic Reform Programme under the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office for their support. Please continue to count on the OECD to work with you and for you for a strong, resilient, sustainable and inclusive recovery in Malaysia. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Mr. Antonio. Now on to launching of the event, I would like to humbly invite Dato Sri Hasnul Zamzam Ahmad, Secretary General, Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, to officially launch the OECD reports, followed by a launching video. Let's welcome Dato Sri.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good afternoon. Mr. Iskandar Ismail, Chief Executive Officer, MyCC Malaysia. Mr. Antonio Gomez, Deputy Director, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs, OECD. Mr. Louis Tek Hyong, Head of Competition, Consumer Protection and IPR Division, ASEAN Secretariat. Officers of the Malaysia Competition Commission, MyCC. Distinguished members and Secretariat of the ASEAN Experts Group on Competition, OECD colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Antonio Gomez, for an enlightening opening remarks. Allow me to begin by saying that it is an honor for me to address this distinguished event, and I wish to thank the Malaysia Competition Commission for hosting this important event. To all our distinguished guests and participants, I appreciate and are deeply thankful for your presence at this event. Today's event celebrates the launch of the two OECD reports, namely, first, OECD Competition Assessment Reviews, Logistics Sector in Malaysia, and two, OECD Competitive Neutrality Reviews, Small Package Delivery Services in Malaysia. I wish to acknowledge the efforts and hard work of all parties who contributed to the success of the reports, in particular the MyCC, Malaysian authorities, local stakeholders, and OECD, with the support of the ASEAN Secretariat and the ASEAN Economic Reform Programme under the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, UK Government. Ladies and gentlemen, these two reports were developed under the OECD's Fostering Competition in ASEAN project. This project was undertaken to support the implementation of the ASEAN Competition Action Plan, ACAP, 2016 to 2025, which relate to reducing anti-competitive regulation and enhancing competitive neutrality for state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, to foster a level playing field for all firms through an effective competition policy. It aims at identifying the main laws and regulations in the logistics and small package delivery service sectors, as well as to conduct an in-depth analysis of laws and regulations that stifle competition, and to make recommendations and improve competition in the market. The project, which commenced in 2018, had completed with a huge success in July 2021 with the production of the two reports. The reports take a deep dive into more than 50 laws and regulations in those markets and produce more than 70 recommendations to ensure competition in the logistics sector and a level playing field in small package delivery services. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the manufacturing and logistic activities have been suspended, and it has affected the demand and supply of various goods, and as a result of restrictions imposed on the manufacturers and retailers. Disruptions to their supply chains and operations seem inevitable. For that reason, the launch of these reports is right on the button, because the policy recommendations offered will assist the Ministry and the MyCC in working together to address issues, especially related to the supply chain that affects the wholesale trade, retail trade, and consumers. We know trade is an important part of the economic growth in Malaysia. However, barriers to competition remain relatively high, particularly in the logistics and transportation sector. Though enhancing competition can be uncomfortable, it remains relevant to contribute to sustainable economic growth by encouraging investment and stimulating the productivity of those markets. Also, given the significant presence of SOEs, the effective implementation of the competitive neutrality principle to ensure a level playing field between public and private market participants is vital to resuming sustainable growth and job creation with economy-wide effects and benefits for its consumers. This becomes more important than ever as Malaysia, like many other countries in the region, continues to face serious challenges as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Dato Sri, for the official launch. Appreciate it. And moving forward, we all want to be understood and given thorough details into what is happening on the OECD reports. And to give us a glimpse of that, let's put our hands together for Mr. Ruben Maximiano, Senior Competition Expert of OECD. Ruben, for your presentation.
I'm guessing that you can. Yes.
We can hear you.
So thank you very much. Let me just see if I can change the slides, if I can move them or not. Yes, I think I can. Excellent. So we're all set. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Secretary General Datuk Seri, Chief Executive Officer Iskandar Ismail of the CEO of MyCC, and ASEAN Secretariat Head of Competition Division, Louis Tek Kian. So good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present a bit further on the two reports that we're launching today at the OECD. We find these reports complement very nicely the MyCC market review on the Malaysia transport sector that were launched this morning. I think together you have a strong package of reform that can really take Malaysia forward to become an ever better logistics hub, and right on the button, as Secretary General Datuk Seri mentioned earlier. And I hope that this presentation now will allow you to understand a little bit better what the main recommendations are, as well as the main steps that we took to reach those recommendations. So let me see if I can move. So we started this project in 2018 with the support of the UK government, as mentioned earlier. That's what's allowed us to undertake our independent analysis. We've done this in all 10 ASEAN countries, and as Deputy Director Antonio Gomes of the OECD mentioned earlier, was launched, the regional reports were launched during the ASEAN Economics Ministerial meeting that took place on the 9th of September. So this is what we did in a nutshell, in a graphic form. Let's say we're looking at regulations and we're making it more business friendly by redrawing the regulations in a way that allows that to happen. So if the agenda for the next few minutes is essentially this one, I'm going to explain the project and its main objectives. I will then turn to the two reports in turn. I will look first at the prioritized competition assessment of the logistics sector, and then I will look at the impact of state-owned enterprises and small package delivery services report, or the competitive neutrality report that we undertook for Malaysia, as we did for all other 9 ASEAN countries, member states. So the project in a nutshell started in 2018. As I mentioned earlier, we were tasked by ASEAN to support the implementation of the ASEAN Competition Action Plan of 2016-2025. And it's essentially made up of those two components that I mentioned, those two reports: the prioritized competition assessment on the logistics sector. The reason why we call it the prioritized, the reason why we call it the prioritized competition assessment on the logistics sector is that the method that we used is a little bit different from what we usually do. We usually do a thorough analysis of the whole sector. In this case, we prioritize the most important pieces of legislation that we had identified in discussions with numerous stakeholders in Malaysia, both public policymakers and private entities. We also, the second component is the competitive neutrality on small package delivery services. So what we were doing essentially was what we have been doing is to identify regulations that are perhaps too restrictive of competition and propose non-binding recommendations for less restrictive regulations that still achieve the same policy objectives. And we did all of that in every country, as mentioned. Every country we issued these two reports, and now is the turn for Malaysia. We had also a regional report which captured the main findings at, let's say, at this more ASEAN-wide level. In Malaysia specifically, we met and consulted throughout the process. It was around a year and a half, the whole process of work on this report for Malaysia. We consulted more than 25 stakeholders, policymakers, and private entities. And that's what allowed us to understand thoroughly the situation in Malaysia from a regulatory perspective, but also from a business perspective, and then to make recommendations and analysis that fed from that information that we gathered in Malaysia. So still having difficulties. Okay, changing the slides. So this is the happy picture, let's say, of the economic ministers of ASEAN when they met on the 9th of September. You see on the right-hand side the Minister of Economics for Economic Affairs in Malaysia, proudly showing as well the two reports that our Secretary General of the OECD provided to the ministers. I think this is important to mention, just that these two reports have been gathering quite a lot of momentum and a lot of interest from the different countries, and it's quite significant to see at such high political level the interest that this has gathered. I think this was the point of this slide. So in Malaysia specifically, as I mentioned, we looked at more than 25 public and private stakeholders that we consulted throughout the process. We had meetings in Malaysia, as well as exchanges via exchange of drafts, exchange of analysis, and discussions over the phone as COVID hit and we can no longer travel. Sorry, and we analyzed quite a lot of legislation, more approximately 50, in fact, if we looked at both of the project components. And ultimately, we issued 78 recommendations, 63 on the prioritized competition assessment of logistics, and 15 for the competitive neutrality report. So if we move now to the logistics services, as I mentioned, the goal was really to try and analyze the sector from the perspective of policymakers and rule makers, as well as private entities, make our own analysis using a competition lens of those rules and regulations that have been identified with the help of policymakers, and then try and make proposals that would make those rules more pro-competitive. We looked at 5 subsectors. In this case, we looked at freight forwarding, small package deliveries, delivery, freight transportation, warehousing services, and value-added logistics services. So not included in the scope, as you know, discussed initially with the ASEAN Secretariat and with the ASEAN experts group on competition. We excluded the air transport as well as customs. So we focused on those 5 subsectors, in particular the freight transportation and freight forwarding, very important for our analysis. So how did this? How do we do? What is the work? What is our work? What do we do when we're analyzing these rules? What is the framework? This is a framework that's called the OECD Competition Assessment Toolkit. We've used this in many jurisdictions across the world, some in OECD countries, some outside of the OECD countries. So we have quite a lot of experience in undertaking this sort of analysis, both in the transport sector as well as in numerous other sectors such as energy, pharmacy, etc. across the world. And in that context, what we do is we do a first screening. We use a checklist that's contained in that OECD Competition Assessment Toolkit, and we try and determine and understand what those rules say, and try and identify any regulatory barriers with a view to lowering them. So we review legal text to identify regulatory barriers to competition, and then we develop the recommendations to make those legal provisions less harmful from a competition perspective, while keeping in mind, of course, the initial objective of the policymaker. So as I said, it takes several steps. we ask these questions here. Do the rules and regulations limit the number or range of suppliers? Do the rules limit the ability of suppliers to compete? And do the rules regulations limit the incentives for suppliers to compete? And does it somehow limit the choices on the information available to consumers? And so there's a number of steps. That's only the first step. Is number 2 is applying the checklist, is what I just mentioned. If after applying that checklist, the answer to some of those questions, or all of those questions, or one of those questions is yes, there is a competition. There is a yes to one of those questions. Then we are in a scenario of competition distortions potential, and we try and analyze that more carefully, go deeper. We analyze that with greater care. And then if it still remains that we do find that there's a competition distortion, then we try and identify alternatives by looking at international best practices as well, to try and determine what there might be. So we look at international experience to see if there's other ways that have been explored by other countries, other jurisdictions, to achieve the same policymakers' objectives that were at the origin of that rule or that law. And all of these elements eventually lead to recommendations and hopefully to implementation. So let me now give you, let's go deeper into the reports. I'm going to give you 3 examples from the reports. So one is the road freight. We looked at road freight, and we found a number of different potential barriers to entry in the regulations, and this is one of them. And that was that there was a need for specific capital requirements for road freight, in particular for container licenses for vehicles that wish to carry third-party cargo. There's a 500,000 Malaysian ringgit capital requirement, which has at its core the objective to ensure that the company has enough capital to operate, and therefore sort of reduce the risk that they're to consumers and to creditors from the company not being able to meet its obligations of transport, its contractual obligations. What we find here is that, you know, having this requirement, this specific capital requirement, is increasing entry costs significantly, and that therefore it discourages investment, and it discourages entry, especially from SMEs. So it's more, you know, what we think that, and this has been, we've done a lot of work, and we've analyzed this quite a lot in a number of instances across just beyond Malaysia as well, and beyond the particular sector of logistics. And we think that this sort of requirement, these sort of minimal capital requirements, it's more of a share of the investment of firms' owners and not the assets available to cover debts and operating costs that it really looks at, or really keeps in mind. And so it's particularly not very efficient if firms are allowed to withdraw deposited funds soon after incorporation. So we think that there's other alternatives that we've seen also across the world, which is using bank guarantees or insurance contracts that could replace those cash deposits to comply with those capital requirements. So what we are proposing here is really a lifting of the sector-specific minimum capital requirements and using these alternatives, bank guarantees or insurance contracts in the reports. The second example I wanted to give you regards cabotage. Cabotage essentially is for those who are not so familiar, is the transportation between domestic ports of goods. So you have international shipping coming in to Malaysia, and that's could be all sorts of ships, foreign-owned, Malaysian-owned. It doesn't matter. But then between ports in Malaysia, according to the 1952 law, there's a general prohibition of foreign vessels from engaging in that domestic shipping between domestic ports in Malaysia. There are some exceptions, but in general, there's this exception. There's this prohibition, and so we do think that this can harm competition, essentially because it prevents market entry of foreign firms, ASEAN or otherwise, and limits the range of suppliers that can provide services on those routes, which essentially leads to an increase, a potential increase in concentration levels and market power on those routes, which might lead to increased operational costs and certainly a decrease in choice, and higher prices, and perhaps also a longer time lag for the delivery of those services. So what we propose here is 3 options for Malaysia. We propose that they open domestic shipping markets to ASEAN competition by lifting the ban on ASEAN vessels carrying domestic cargo. And secondly, by allowing ships to travel domestically to the port of final call after arriving at the first port of entry, there might be a possibility that foreign ships might do that. In particular, if in certain routes after a market study, it comes to the conclusion, the authorities, that in fact there's more demand in that particular route than otherwise that would require more supply, and therefore particularly in those routes, this is an option of allowing specific operations to occur for foreign ships to reduce that roadblock, that pressure that is happening on a particular route, if that's the case. So these are the recommendations on cabotage. The third example that I want to give before I move on to the competitive neutrality report is regarding the ratification of the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Multimodal Transport. We know that 7 other countries in ASEAN have already ratified this. We think that essentially this agreement at ASEAN-wide level regulates liability, it regulates documents that and operations of multimodal transport operators across ASEAN countries, and so really facilitates trade, facilitates their activity. So we think that failure to implement and ratify this framework into Malaysian law essentially increases the costs for operators, because they need to have, if they change transport from road to maritime or vice versa, they need, there's no common understanding of liability of the documents that are needed. And this is, of course, an increasing cost for operations and actually limits their ability to provide services across ASEAN. And of course, very importantly from a business perspective, there is uncertainty and issues regarding all of those points on liability, documents that are needed, etc., for the different parts of the transport routes, and that that uncertainty is inimical to, doesn't help businesses when they're making their business plans. So we are recommending to ratify and implement that ASEAN framework. So if I move now to the small, so that's, in a nutshell, some of the recommendations that we have on logistics services, looking at the rules and regulations and try to make them more pro-competitive, more business-friendly, allowing SMEs to enter and others. The second report is the small package delivery services competitive neutrality report that looks at GLCs, in particular in the case of Malaysia, and we have a number of different. We know that the sector has undertaken quite a significant amount of privatization initiatives in the last few years. GLCs today, however, still constitute a significant part of Malaysia's economic tissue. What we see in the midterm review of the 11th Malaysian Plan, for instance, up to 2020, was that it had actually identified GLC policies as a strategy to improve market efficiency and fair competition. So this report really comes hand in hand with already a strategy that was being put in place by the Malaysian government. And what is that strategy? Well, it's one of leveling the playing field. Recently, the OECD has actually issued a recommendation. The OECD Council has approved the recommendation on competitive neutrality. It really is about making sure that there's a level playing field between state-owned enterprises and private entities and those and regardless of also of nationality, in order that there's this level playing field that companies who are more efficient can operate in the market without there being any undue competitive advantage or disadvantages that are being conferred upon certain entities. That doesn't mean, of course, that SOEs or GLCs cannot pursue legitimate policy goals that can actually solve market failures. We're very respectful of that. That's not what we're not trying to eliminate in any way the role of GSCs or the role of SOEs. What we're trying to do is just leveling the playing field to the extent possible, making sure that they're not benefiting from special rights and privileges that others cannot rely on. And we think that is what allows for the competition to happen in the market, for more efficient entry to come in, and for domestic players to actually expand abroad as well, become more competitive, and for foreign players, of course, to invest in the region, in particular in Malaysia. And so let me give you some overview of the steps of the actual process that we undertook. Apologies for that. So first of all, in every country that we did this report, and again, as a gentle reminder, we did this report in 10 countries. We identified SOEs in the logistics sector. We then identified what those special rights and privileges were and considered the justifications for those. Were they in place for reasons of solving a market failure? And then understanding what the potential impact on solving that market failure and whether they're going beyond that or not. And so we analyzed that in depth. We looked at international best practices in the small package delivery services, which is so important for e-commerce. And we, inspired on those international best practices, we make some recommendations to Malaysian policymakers. So what we found is, very briefly, a very competitive landscape of small package delivery services in Malaysia. We see a very significant increase in e-commerce and a very significant increase of number of players. There's more than 100 players at the last mile delivery. We see a lot of startups, and we saw also that POS Malaysia is the main GLC active in small package delivery services, and indeed the sole universal service licensee. And POS Malaysia, even though competition has increased over the last few years, is still one of the largest providers of both business to consumers and business to business small package delivery services in Malaysia. So just two brief examples on the recommendations we had here. One was on universal service. This idea that was already mentioned by Deputy Director Antonio Gomes about the need to adequately compensate the entities that are undertaking public policy objectives that are being adequately compensated for that, for the universal service, in order to ensure that even remote areas are being served by small package delivery services that can receive e-commerce and can indulge in e-commerce. You need to have, in certain instances, universal service obligations. That's the same for postal services. And what we see, and the important principle here is that you are adequately compensated for those areas where you have reserve activity, and so universal service obligations usually are reserved, and that you don't use those, and that you're not being overly compensated, in which case you might be using those additional revenues that go beyond the costs and the reasonable profit, and you are subsidizing areas where you're actually competing with private entities. And so the issue here is that we wanted to make sure that POS Malaysia, as the universal service service operator in Post, was not receiving more than adequate compensation for those services. And the truth was, it was not very clear. It certainly did not receive any direct funding for that, but it was unclear to what extent they were receiving whether their compensation was over and above or under what it should have been. and that was because there's no separation of accounts. So MyCC, POJ Malaysia does not separate its accounts for its universal service obligations and its commercial activity. So it's essentially not possible to understand that. And so we've made some proposals to ensure that first, the regulated rates for universal service actually reflect costs and take into account other public funds, grants or subsidies. And then, of course, that there's clear separation of accounts so that you can ensure that is the case at every moment in time. The second example regards competition law. And again, here, we looked at the regulatory framework, and the principle really is that SOEs, in this case GLCs, should be subject to level playing field as regards competition enforcement in the marketplace. And here we looked at the Competition Act 2010, and we saw that it applies to any commercial activity, but there are some exclusions. And it was unclear whether some of the activities of POJ Malaysia were subject or not to the Competition Act, because the Postal Services Act assigns competition powers to MCMC and contains its own competition law provisions. So here what we say, what we recommend is clarify which activities are actually covered by the Competition Act or not. Perhaps by guidelines or through amendments to the Competition Act. And secondly, clarify who has jurisdiction over competition law issues in the small package delivery services, and consider conferring MyCC sole jurisdiction eventually, or at least making sure that the rules, the competition rules, are the same for in both regimes. And the MCMC and the MyCC. So these are the recommendations we have. I'm happy to discuss some more of these during the panel and to take eventually questions if needed. But I think, the COVID crisis has given us is a moment that requires a regulatory refresh. Malaysia has had a hit, as we saw. And it needs to improve its economic outlook, and definitely looking at regulations, ensuring that markets are business friendly, that vibrant new companies can come in and compete, and that will definitely be a driver for economic recovery and economic growth going forward in Malaysia. And in particular, the logistics sector really lies at the base of the whole economy. In order for goods to be moved and services to be moved from one place to another, you need a vibrant, efficient logistics services. And we believe that these reports provide a menu of options that the policymakers in Malaysia can take into consideration, and to help the logistics sector become that vibrant logistics, that vibrant hub that the Malaysian policymakers wish to have. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ruben. Thank you so much, Mr. Ruben. Let's all join together on a panel discussion right now to speak about the takeaways from the market review and the OECD reports on Malaysia Transportation Sector. To moderate the panel, I would like to invite Dato Sri Wong the advisor of Star Media Group. He has over 30 years of experience in the media industry. Highlights of his career includes interviews with personalities such as Stephen Hawking and Bill Clinton, and has also received the Best Journalist Award in 2003 for his contribution to the media industry. Joining the panel is Mr. Ruben Maximiano, Senior Competition Expert OECD. He is responsible for the work on competition policy in the Asia-Pacific region and coordinates the work on the COVID-19 crisis in the competition division. Next on the panel is Ms. Graciela Miralles, is a senior economist at the Markets, Competition and Technology Unit of the World Bank Group. She has led several projects focusing on increasing the effectiveness of competition policies in more than 30 countries. Followed by Dato IR Haji Muhammad Jamal bin Sulaiman, member of Commission of MyCC. He began his career as a civil engineer in July 1981, and during his 36 years of service, he has served in various posts and places such as the Economic Planning Unit, Hulu Selangor District Water Supply Department, and JKR Selangor State. He was also awarded the Excellent Service Award and JKR Special Achievement Award 2010 during the span of his public service career. His last post was the Senior Director of Building Works Branch at JKR Malaysia, and he retired as a government employee in 2017. Lastly, we have Dato Dr. Michael Teo, Group Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director, PKT Logistics Group Sendirian Berhad, a leading logistics service provider in Malaysia. Dato Sri received honorary doctorate in Logistic Management from University Utara Malaysia in 2018 and also sits as adjunct professor for UUM, UMK and UPSI. Over the years, PKT Logistics helped logistic education by collaborating with many public universities and polytechnics. PKT Logistics owns Peninsula College, which sets up campuses inside a logistic hub to improve the quality of logistic education by incorporating teaching in a working environment. With the philosophy, if doctors can be taught in a hospital environment, why not future logistician in a logistic hub? Everyone, without further ado, let's begin the panel.
Is everybody in as well?
Over to you, Dato Sri Wong Chun.
Hello, salam bahagia and a very good afternoon to all Malaysians and followers from around the world who are watching this. Welcome to our discussion on the takeaways from the logistics sector in Malaysia, as well as the competitive neutrality reviews on small package delivery services in Malaysia. I'd like to welcome especially Dr. Ruben Maximiano, who is dialing in from Paris. I know you have given a lengthy review, but we're going to keep you for a little while, so be patient. We have, of course, Datuk Engineer Haji Muhammad Jamal bin Sulaiman from the MCC, and Dr. Graciela Miralles from Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's so far away, okay? But we're so pleased to see you. And of course, my friend, Dato Sri Michael Teo, the Chief Executive Officer from PKT Logistics Group, who will give us a view of the industry from as a player. Now, before we start this interesting discussion, let me just do an overall review, overall introduction of what the Malaysian logistics sector is like. So in 2019, the transport and storage sector amounted for 3.8% of the GDP, with a gross value added, which was estimated at 57.2 billion ringgit. The sector employed 667,000 people, representing around 4.4% of the employed population in 2019. So that's a huge figure for a small country like Malaysia. Malaysia's liner shipping connections with other countries have significantly improved since 2006. Its two biggest ports are Port Klang and Port Tanjung Pelapis, both ranking 12th and 18th worldwide, respectively. The ports rank 2 and 3rd in the ASEAN region. The Malaysian government has classified logistics as a priority industry, and there are several government initiatives in this sector. So before we invite the panelists, the esteemed panelists, to give their views, I know all of you have been working so hard on these reports, and all of you are really passionate about this subject. But because of our time limitation, we have only 1 hour, 30 minutes to 40 minutes. So I appeal to everyone to keep their replies precise and short. We are all excited. And to start the conversation, I'd like to pose this question to the panelists on the views of the general state of the supply chains. Most of these countries in the world, including Malaysia, are just about to leave the COVID-19 pandemic situation. We are trying to recover and to be on track again. But of course, it has affected the country's logistics issue for a while. So can I have a quick response on how best should Malaysia and other countries in ASEAN react to this disruption of the supply chain and how we should move on from here? Please, can I have these views, please, from each and every one of you? A short take, please. Perhaps we can start off with Michael.
Yes, okay, all right. So basically, hi Chunwai. Basically, the way I look at global supply chain is Malaysia and ASEAN continue to be the component manufacturer for the big nation like US and also in the European Union. So component manufacturer go back to their home country and then they make the final assembly and they sell it there. Then with the Donald Trump coming out with the policy of Make in America, so a lot of manufacturers went back to America, but they do only for final assembly. Before that, they used to buy the component from Asia, do the final assembly in Asia, and then distribute worldwide. Now, component go back to US and then come back to Asia again as a finished goods. So during the pandemic, there is a disruption in terms of how this whole thing movement, because it started in China first, where China has a lockdown, and that is where all the container stuck in China. And China is supposed to be also one of the major component supplier to the US as well. But the US is working, and there is a shortage of demand, shortage of supply for the components to make into the final goods. When the China open up, America start to lock down. So then they have supply, the containers will start moving to the America and got stuck in America as well. So when America opened up, Asia locked down, okay? And then we have problem sending the container from here to the America. So that caused a tremendous jump in the ocean freight. They went up from to double fold and certain routes all the way to triple fold the freight price. So that caused a lot of disruption, and also one of the vessel that is famously stuck at the Suez Canal also disrupted the world supply chain. So world supply chain has been so critical over the years, and we Asian are playing a very important role in order for them in the developed country to get their computers right. During the pandemics, we cannot buy cars because nobody's going out. So then what happened is a lot of microchips manufacturers shift their production from microchips for automotive industry, they move to the E&E industry. So when this thing happened, when they start opening up and then start assembly the computers, but the components from Malaysia cannot be exported to the other side. So that caused a lot of havoc, a lot of costs. We were also stuck in the situation, especially in Malaysia, because Malaysia never come across this situation where we need to lock down. Okay, so when we say lockdown at that time, we are also not sure. Lockdown means essential goods only can move, but the non-essential cannot move. So you can imagine the amount of containers stuck in the port and the amount of pressure that we get, the manufacturer in Malaysia get from their buyer in European country. Hey, my goods, if you don't send it to me, I'm going to charge you penalty. So not only they are facing that penalty and the chances that they will lose the business, but in Malaysia side, they have to bear all the storage, the demurrage, the detention charges from these things. On top of that, when they finish doing the product, they send it to Europe, the price have went up, the ocean freight have went up 3 times. So that is a huge disruption. And then nobody have ever come across this situation. So they also do not know how to handle that.
Right.
So
Yes.
if you ask me for recommendation, I think the authority need to be very open-minded and then need to discuss with the industry together, because subsequently MCO2, MCO3, they are able to manage it a bit better because they did not lock down the non-essential item. So they allowed the non-essential item to continue to move. That is the congestion of the port. And then because the congestion of the port is the container can move, the price of the freight stabilize a little bit. So that is my outlook.
Obviously, like as a consumer, I've noticed because of the congestion at the ports and the disruption, the cost has been passed down to consumers. For those of us Malaysians who buy fruits, they find that it's become so much costly to buy imported goods. Maybe perhaps I can ask this question to Dr. Graciela about your views on how disruptions in ports have impacted on many countries.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, the views I'm going to share today are my own and do not necessarily coincide with those of the World Bank. But I would like to say that we have seen the disruptions due to the COVID pandemic, due to other events that my colleague was mentioning. But we have also seen the resilience of supply chains. So although it is a very broad question on how to address this, I think that one important question is understanding what are the bottlenecks, where are they coming from, and identify where are the bottlenecks throughout the supply chain. And so basically, this will allow us to understand those issues that are transitory in nature and due to a shock, but also there are many issues that are structural in nature. Many issues that are structural in nature, and those are the issues that are addressed by the reports that we are discussing today. And that is why we go back to the role of competition and the importance of competition. Because as the Economist was writing in a recent article, resilience in value chains comes not from autarky, but from the diverse sources of supply. And I think we need to remember the importance of diverse sources of supply, because diverse sources of supply are directly related with the ability to have competitive markets that offer a variety of products and sources of supply. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you so much. Dato Haji Muhammad Jamal, can I have your take, please?
Thank you, Dato Seri Wong. I would like to say that with the pandemic, in fact everybody, not only Malaysia, but the whole world was suffering. They did not know what to do with this severe pandemic and crisis. In fact, if you go to the Western countries, the developed countries were also suffering. So it is not uncommon that even Malaysia was suffering for the last probably 1.5 to 2 years. I think the biggest disruption was that people cannot move. And when people cannot move, they cannot do the activities which are normally done during normal times. And instead of doing that, especially in the logistics sector, transportation sector, we have a problem where people cannot move. Construction sector was very affected badly in Malaysia. So people cannot move. Therefore, I think what we are looking is that we would like the government to have ease burden, so that at least the people can now move. I think Alhamdulillah, with the current scenario where we have 70 to 80% where people got vaccinated in Malaysia, especially for the above 50, I think now they are more relaxing to move around, and they have relaxed a bit for activities to carry forward. So I think this is a good move by the government. I think we can see in future, hopefully by November, December, when the thing will move better, I think we can get a better picture of the situation. I think that's my initial comment. Thank you.
We can't hear you. You're muted, Chun.
Yeah. Hang on. I think it's the other end, not my side. Perhaps somebody can help me from the MCC side?
We can hear you now well.
Okay, great. All right, sorry.
Okay.
I was saying that in follow-up to what Dato Muhammad Jamal has said, so the country's population is about 88% that has been vaccinated. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will reach the 90% figure. And like everybody else, we accept the fact that this is an endemic and we're going to live with it. So, Mr. Ruben, perhaps coming from Paris, you can give us a glimpse of what is happening in Europe following the congestion. Europe has opened up before other countries. So please share with us with a short uptake on what's happening over your side.
Hi, Chun. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel. In fact, indeed, as you say, difficult times and at the same time, exciting times for logistics as well, for bad reasons, but also for good reasons, I think. And I hope that this panel will explore both of those. And I'd like to agree with essentially my previous speakers. I mean, the picture that was shared to us initially by Michael Teo, this port congestions, it's very real, it's happening. Prices are high for shipping. We see that not just in Malaysia, not just in ASEAN countries, but across the world. Graciela mentioned the importance of competition alternatives, choice for containers to have supply chains that work. I think the point I would like to make here is that competition is not a luxury at this moment in time. It's quite the opposite. And for those two reasons that I've just mentioned, let me just very briefly mention what they are. I mean, we have stacks of empirical evidence that show that the way out of a crisis is not less competition, it's actually more, because it gets companies fighting for the best deal for customers, which gets productivity going and economic growth. And also, these alternatives, players that can jump in if there's some issues with one of the suppliers in the supply chain. So how can competition help? And that's what we're talking about today, is using this competition lens for looking at the structure, the regulatory structure, and seeing whether it's possible to streamline regulatory framework in a way that makes it more business friendly. So that new entrants can come in with new ideas, with new methods, providing alternatives, and ultimately reducing prices that will, sort of jumpstart the economy. So by making ports and roads more efficient, by using the assets that you have, you can, by using them smarter, let's say, it will actually help to free up businesses to do what they do best, which is to find opportunities and efficiencies and innovate. And that's what we are hoping that this regulatory refresh that we're proposing can help specifically Malaysia to do.
Yes, Ruben, thank you so much, because obviously the gist and the conversation that is happening today is obviously about competition, opening it up, reforms, and removing barriers and tariffs. Now, just a follow-up to to what you have said, the timing of the OECD competition review on the logistics sector and the competitive neutrality reviews on small package delivery services in Malaysia are certainly appropriate given the importance of this sector. Ruben, a lot of journalists are watching this program and are hearing our conversation. Obviously, that many of them do not have the opportunity to read this 173-page report. Even for me, after spending time reading these reports, I think I could absorb perhaps 80% of it, but it was like sitting for a university exam, okay? So we want you to give a short gist to tell viewers the gist of these two reports.
Okay, so if you want to, it's fascinating reading, even if it's long reading, I can assure you. So I do encourage you to read it. There's highlights which are providing also, which can help as well many people who don't want to invest the time that it would take to read 173 pages. They can read a 4-page highlights that can help, that will give you the main ideas. But I think the main idea, if you want like a bottom line, is looking at regulations and making them more business friendly. That's what we are trying to do. We're trying to understand how can you minimize costs to businesses while still achieving the same policy objectives of road safety or whatever policy objective might be behind initially having that regulation. So that's the bottom line, let's say. Now, if I give you if I can unpack that a little bit, what we see is that Malaysia is really top of the class when it comes to the ASEAN region and as regards investment on transport infrastructure per capita over the last 2 decades. I mean, Malaysia is top of class. So that's meant that you are overall 29th in the world out of 141 countries in the global ranking as regards transport infrastructure. So quite an important investment that has been made, and top-notch infrastructure that you have in Malaysia. It's actually better than all other ASEAN countries except for one. So you have Port Klang, you have Port Pelapas, as mentioned in your introduction, that are in the top 3 in ASEAN, top 20 in the world. But contrasting to this is that when you look at the logistics rankings, the logistics performance index, you actually rank lower than some of your partners in ASEAN. You rank lower than Thailand and Vietnam and Singapore, and you sit at 41 in the world. So there's this gap between the 29th best infrastructure and the 41st in the world in logistics performance index. Compounded with that, you have a sector that's actually decreased by 21% last year on year, in Q2 in the second quarter of last year. So, these reports are not focusing on investment. We're not saying that those investments are not important. They are. They just were not the focus of what we're looking at. We are just proposing that those assets be used better in a regulatory renewal. And often what you have is regulations that identify that have very good policy reasons, but also have unintended consequences on competition. And there's often, looking around the world, there's often ways that from learning by doing, certain countries have achieved international best practices. And that's what we are proposing here, is that you can benefit from those international best practices by our recommendations that we have. And what we think the outcome of this will be is that there's significant benefits that will come for Malaysia and for ASEAN broadly. I mean, at the ASEAN-wide level, we've calculated at the very minimum and a very conservative estimate of $4.5 billion per year in benefits to consumers in terms of reduced prices of transport costs and logistics costs. That's a very conservative estimate, as I mentioned. And if you think about it, I mean, if you reduce prices, that allows manufacturers across the region to benefit from having faster and cheaper transport costs, and that allows for that extra competition to happen and for ultimately, consumers to have better prices at their end, and that can have significant knock-on spillover effects across the world, across the economy, because logistics really does lie at the base of the cost pyramid. It's fundamental for all sectors of the economy.
Okay, we will leave that particular part about ranking and come back to the subject again, because that was of great interest to me, and I think to Michael too as well. And I would like to follow up with Dato Jamal. As for MyCC, you have just launched the market review on transportation sector, focusing on port logistics ecosystem and the motor vehicle warranty. Can we have an overview of the market review from yourself, please?
Thank you, Datuk Seri Wong. I think to condense a report of 335 pages into probably a 5 to 10 minute review, I think it's a very daunting task for me, but anyway, I'll try my best. First of all, for the benefit of, I think for those who are more conversant with the competition law, I think they have not much issue understanding what I'm going to tell. But I would like to tell only for those who are actually not involved with competition laws and so on. So I think this is more important for them, especially for the consumers and the public per se. So before I begin with that, we're saying that this market review, I give the title first, at least for understanding of everybody. The title of this market review is Market Review under Competition Law, Competition Act 2010 for selected transportation sectors in Malaysia, i.e. for logistic ecosystem and motor vehicle warranty. So there are two. There's very narrow scope, because if you look at the transportation sector per se, it is very wide. You have a warehouse operation and support services. You have the land transport. You have the water transport. You have the air transport, and you have the port and courier services, which was mentioned in the OECD studies. So, but the MyCC has focused to the port ecosystem and motor warranty, because these are actually the gateway to our economic development. The port sector, gateway for, and the motor warranty, motor vehicle, because many people use motor for personal vehicle as well as for transportation of goods and services. So that's why we choose this topic in order to focus on these two sectors, subsectors, and also at the same time, we want to look at, is there any possible anti-competitive behaviors among the market players? And then we can address this issue, as well as probably some market regulatory concerns and market issues. So those are the things why we want to choose this topic. So the period of the study was carried out about 1 year, but because of the pandemic situation, it was extended for another 4 or 5 months. So probably slightly more than 1 year from the original period. So actually, this study looks into the why we want to choose this, actually two scope we mentioned earlier, port logistic as well as motor vehicle. So there are two scopes, yeah, as mentioned earlier. Now, when looking at this scenario, we look at who are the players in order to understand what they are actually. What are they doing? What sectors are involved? I think, in fact, before that, I just go back, actually, why we carry out this study, under what power? Actually, under Section 11, 1 of the Competition Act 2010, MyCC has the power to carry out market studies. So based on this premise, therefore, we choose these subsectors to be carried out with the study within that time period. Okay. After understanding the scenario, then we must look at the players involved. Who are the supply chain? Those are for possibly the port operators, the warehouse operators, the depots, the shipping liners, the freight forwarders, the hauliers, as well as the custom and the government regulatory bodies. So those are the issues that the players that is involved in the port logistics system. As for the motor vehicle warranty, we are looking at the motor supply manufacturers, the insurance agencies, the motor repairers, as well as the consumers. So those are the things that were involved in the supply chain of these two subsectors. Okay. If we look at the market concentration for these port operators, we have about 91% for the two ports, CR2, which is Port Klang and Port Tanjung Lepas. Therefore, the MyCC was looking at, were there or is there, or are there any competitive behaviors that can actually distort the competition, as well as having the element of anti-competitive behaviors among the people, among the players. Yeah. So under the competition, market and regulatory concern, there are many actually. The study has found out about 23 recommendations from possible 17 issues. And also for the motor warranty, we have about 4 competition and market regulatory concern, but we have come up with 5 recommendations. But of course, I'm not going to go into all the recommendations, possibly due to time constraint, probably maybe can go to a few of them, for example, as mentioned earlier. So under the competition market authority, competition issues, for the port operators, we are looking at the port operators, there are market issues, competition issues. For the hauliers, for the forwarders, and also, so all this actually we look at how we discreditize the people. The players, competition issues, market issues, regulatory concern. So each of these players, we go into turn by turn. So there are, as I said earlier, they come up with 17 issues and 23 recommendations for the port logistics ecosystem.
Dato, I'd like to expand a bit. I'd like you to expand a bit on the motor vehicle warranty for the interest of laymen like me, who may not quite understand when we talk about motor vehicle warranty and how it relates to the logistics sector.
Okay. For the motor vehicle warranty, for example, when a manufacturer sells a car, car X, for example, in the term of condition, when you buy the car, they give you the warranty. For example, 5 years warranty, 7 years warranty, or 10 years warranty. So these issues actually, there is a possible of anti-competitive behavior, because when you lock down with the buyer that you buy the car, we give you 5-year warranty or 7-year warranty. But this 7-year warranty is not free. You must pay for it. So they put into the cost of the vehicle. Therefore, the vehicle cost will automatically increase because the manufacturer want to lock you up with the servicing part. So these are the things we can discuss later on how we unbundle the thing, for example. Because if you can sell the car at cheaper price, but you give option to the buyer whether you want a guarantee or without the guarantee. So those are the things that that is an issue which was raised up in this report.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Michael Teo, as a industry player, what does these reports means to you and the relevance of it from the perspective of an industry player? We can hear you.
Me? Okay, all right.
Okay, right.
So I would say that it's very relevant to us because we want to position PKT as an ASEAN logistics provider, not only just Malaysian. So what we have done is we went around ASEAN countries to set up companies, or branches and whatnot, and we found a lot of restriction in all the other countries. In Indonesia, I just found out Indonesia, they are still like foreigner up to 49% only allowed. So that means if we cannot own majority, then there is a problem. We cannot invest because we cannot consolidate the sales into our group, and also being a minority, we cannot invest into assets as well. So that is becoming a problem for us. So we know that ASEAN regionalization was supposed to be like European Union, open up, then we have free movement of cargoes, and then all the forwarders can have branches everywhere and whatnot. We will offer one package service to our client, which is the MNCs, to use us within the entire ASEAN country. But now we have restriction. We cannot open a branch over in another country because they are protecting their industry. So we are waiting for when are they going to open up, and what is ASEAN regionalization supposed to do, So they are supposed to create this open up economy so that we have a seamless trade. One truck can move from Singapore to Malaysia to Thailand and then all the way to maybe Laos or Cambodia and so forth. So we would like to see what is happening in Europe, happening in ASEAN as well. So this report, actually, I saw, of course, just now Ruben have presented it. It means we are moving towards a direction like European Union already, okay? No regulation among ASEAN countries. But the problem here is, which country going to start deregulate their industry first? Everybody is protecting because this one you are talking about industry means you take over my market share. How can Malaysian come over and carry our cargo and so forth? There were bound to be arguments within ASEAN country. And then not only that, we are looking at liberalizing everything, what Ruben had proposed, almost everything. But when the MSC come into Malaysia, are Malaysian ready to fight with them or not? Are we in the same playing field or not? Because the thing here is, when I wanted to do this business in a very big way, so we look at who is our customer. Our customer are MNCs as well, MNC manufacturer. So MNC manufacturers always use back the MNC logistics service provider. So what happened to the local domestic logistics provider? What are we going to do? So I find that we must be ready as well. So that is why during the time when we heard about the transport industry want to open up so that Malaysian trucks can go over to Thailand and whatnot, they say, or they always tell the government, no, don't let go now, because why? We are not ready. So the question is, when are we going to be ready? Because it's already 2015 we become a union, and then now it's already 2021. So I'm ready, because why? During the time when we transform our company, we look into why the MNC manufacturer don't use a domestic logistics service provider, why they only use foreign brand. Okay, we found out that we are not speaking their same language, means we are not talking about English, we are talking about time to market, how fast we can deliver their cargo and on time. All right. So then the other thing is infrastructure are not world class. Our infrastructure are Malaysian standard is different from the MNC standard. Okay. So then they are talking about the human resource capital as well, talking about logistician. Where does Malaysian going to get their logistician? Because MNC logistics service provider, they have a sets of training that they are used in every country, and they train their own employees, and they have software. The software is acceptable by the manufacturer. But whereas Malaysian local logistics provider don't have the multinational software that is acceptable by the MNC. So there's a lot of challenges. So you need to transform yourself, and there's no branding in the Asian. We don't care about environment. There's no social responsibility involved. So there's a lot of things that multinational manufacturers look at for a logistics service provider beside price. They also look at your social responsibility. Are you building environmentally friendly warehouses or not? Are you having take care of the local society or not, and all these things? So now the question is, are we ready for them or not? If we're going to open up now, we're going to be dominated by MNCs. And where are Malaysians going to stand? So, Dato Seri, so this is my take as what. So I'm very happy because I'm ready. But my question is are my other Malaysian logistics provider, are they ready or not? Because they are so small, whereas they are such a giant. So with their money, compared to what we have, I think it's very difficult to fight with them. We may be looking at 95% Malaysian logistics industry dominated by MNC and only 5% for Malaysian. So that is a bit worrying.
But the reality is that small companies need to consolidate, and competition will always give way to effectiveness and better pricing. And no one can escape from competition, which if you look at the reports are what it is all about. Now, I'd like to pose this question to Ruben. This is a quick side jump. Obviously, that because of COVID-19, there has been congestion, but at the same time, it has also resulted in an abrupt and very sharp increase in the use of e-commerce all across ASEAN, including Malaysia. The number of shopping applications have shot up. In the case of Malaysia, the growth is about 15%. Generally, what kind of barriers can we remove to make e-deliveries even cheaper for the consumers? Ruben, your take, please.
Thank you, Chun. I mean, if I can just quickly go back to what Dr. Michael Teo mentioned. I mean, is Malaysia ready? Is protection the answer? Is essentially the question you're asking there, and there is something to be said about competition policy, competition law, and how market power can be tackled as well. You mentioned that by lowering barriers to entry, in fact, you're also allowing for that competition to occur. It doesn't mean that that's the answer to everything, and no, education of Malaysian logisticians, as you mentioned, wouldn't have to be done, etc. So it needs to be accompanied, of course, with a set of other policies. It's not the panacea that is going to solve the logistics problem on its own. It needs to be integrated into a wider sphere, but definitely it can help Malaysia to become more competitive. So if I'm now to answer your question, Chun Wai, I mean, we looked at under the hood, let's say, and we thought that it was time for a tune-up. So we know that logistics is really an engine for commerce, and when it's running well, or when it's not running well, rather, it can actually be a brake on businesses that want to manufacture, that want to produce, that want to trade, and it's just too costly. They're not competitive enough because the transport costs are too high. And we saw that in a number of countries in ASEAN, where the logistics costs were just extremely much higher than in other parts of the world. That's not the case for Malaysia. So rethinking those regulations, we think, can really benefit and get rid of those bottlenecks. And that's why we have these 78 recommendations that we suggest. And now And COVID has only made that more important than ever to get the whole thing kickstarting again. But for that, you need to, we found that there's too many rules, and there's perhaps some roadblocks that can be lifted. So let me give you just three examples, perhaps concrete ones. So one is about the fact that in Malaysia you require a single license for the carriage of both cargo and containers. So if you're carrying cargo, you need a license. Your truck needs a license for that cargo. If you want to travel containers, transport containers, you need another license. So operators need to basically choose up front: are they going to use the truck for cargo? Are they going to use the truck for containers? They can't really adapt to the business needs in a very flexible way. So we are proposing that to create some sort of single license regime where freight transport licensing can be done for both. So that's one. That will make it easier for demand to adjust, for the allocation of resources and prices to go down accordingly for e-commerce, as well as other sorts of products that are being transported in this way. So the second one is make the domestic shipping markets, in particular if there are certain routes where there's perhaps some bottlenecks, use some sort of assessment system that will allow to at least open those routes to ASEAN or other operators. That will also at least decrease the pressures amongst certain routes and reduce pricing amongst them. And of course, I mentioned earlier this idea that you have the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Multimodal Transport, a bit what Dr. Teo mentioned. There's all these ASEAN framework arrangements, but they need to be ratified, they need to be put in place. And this particular framework has been actually ratified in 7 countries in ASEAN, but not in Malaysia. And it regulates liability, it regulates documents between whenever you're using trucks and ports, for instance, and maritime. You need to you don't really know what the liability is, who is liable for what along the value chain. So this sort of makes it more uniform across ASEAN countries, and that definitely can facilitate trade and continue to ensure that e-commerce continues to grow and become a more important, even more important than it already is today. So these are some of the examples of things that we propose in the reports.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Graciela. I've watched some of the interviews you have given on YouTube. You have spoken quite strongly on the need for competition, which is what it's all about. How can competition, liberalization, and the review of archaic-old laws help Malaysia to be more competitive in the world? Does protectionist attitude, whether it's nationalistic, or whether it's political, or whether it's economic reason, hinders the development of our logistics sectors? Your views, please.
Thank you very much. Yes. Obviously, I'm a keen advocate and a very convinced advocate for competition policy, since this is my job, and I truly believe that the critical problems of competition are many times not so much related with the anti-competitive practices and anti-competitive actions of public bodies as much as with regulation. And this is why, even going back a little bit on the very objective of the reports, these reports are really relevant because they put the emphasis on the need to have a regulatory environment that actually promotes competition, and a regulatory environment that is going to create efficient market dynamics. And although the colleagues in MyCC have also identified a number of practices that could be anti-competitive, and that's a fantastic compliment, what we see is that both the OECD report as well as the MyCC report are focusing on the need to embed competition principles in regulation, and that is absolutely critical. Now, what is, for me, the sequel of the reports, or the question that I would like to ask both the colleagues in the OECD and MyCC is basically that not all regulation is created equal. What we see here is a wealth of analytics that have identified a number of issues that need to be reformed. But the question is, how do we reform? How do we actually implement and tackle those issues? And especially, How do we move from the smaller ticket items, which are also part of the report, to the big ticket items, the structural reforms, the difficult reforms to tackle? And from that perspective, I think there are two ideas that would help to map this or to create this roadmap for reform, which is consider feasibility and impact. So it's somehow very important to consider not only what are the constraints and identify what are the constraints, but what is the real feasibility to remove those constraints. And something that can help to that end is basically quantifying the impact. What we see in the report is a very clear identification of the problem, what is the harm to competition, what other countries have done to tackle those issues. But something that might help advocate for the reforms is precisely quantify what are the loss that is associated with these restrictions, and especially what are the gains that could come from eliminating these restrictions. So from that perspective, the benchmarking exercise is great. We have a lot of very valuable examples, but I think that for me, the sequel of the reports would be to better understand how to translate these analytics into implementing reforms. And from that perspective, let me just make a small point in the report on MyCC, because I like one aspect specifically, which is how the MyCC reports identify who need to be the reform champions. I mean, we see this is the problem, this is the harm to competition, but if we engage in reform, these are the bodies that need to be involved, and not only the critical bodies that need to be involved, but let also us identify those adjacent bodies that need to be supportive. So I think that this was a great way to kind of like think about implementation already, and from my perspective, this would be the way to bring the results of the reports to the next level, which is, you know, market outcomes. Thank you.
Dr. Graciela, I have a follow-up question for you. When we talk about competition, and as Dr. Michael Teo said, there's always been resistance, and it will come probably from the players and the lobbyist group, which they do not want any form of competition that comes from external competition, in particularly international groups, which are more bigger organized, much more stronger in backing, financial backing. They fear this competition, and there will always be lobby groups that applies a lot of pressure on their government. How do governments react to such pressure? Because that it is easy to talk about competition and to open up the market and to do reforms, but at the end of the day, for most government and for most politicians, they end up having to face these very powerful lobbies, people in the industries which do not want any kind of competition. What is your view?
I think you're mute.
Yeah, okay, right. I can't hear her, okay.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I am muted myself.
Graciela, yes, sorry. You okay?
The short answer would be transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So something that we have done recently with the OECD and the Malaysian government has been to build product market regulation indicators for Malaysia. And these product market regulation indicators actually measure to what extent the existing regulation in key sectors of the economy actually support or inhibit competition. And basically these product market regulation indicators that were captured in the economic update mentioned by Antonio Gomez precisely capture as one of the critical aspects to capture when we think about what we want in the regulatory framework. They capture this. They capture the relationship with lobbies, to what extent there is public processes to engage with lobbies, to what extent there is disclosure on the way the government has interacted with the interest groups, because there's no problem to interact with interest groups. I believe interacting with interest groups can be necessary and powerful to better understand how to shape regulation for private sector development. It's impossible for the government to be in an ivory tower without interacting with the groups. But the question is, you need transparency to make sure that these contacts are part of the process, are part of a well-documented process, so that you can bring these views into the regulatory process and at the same time ensure that there is no any kind of problem related with what can come from lack of transparency. Thank you.
This looks like a ongoing and endless battle to push for competition, because even in very developed countries like the United States, despite advocating for free competition, it also imposes a lot of protectionist barriers on other countries. So that's a reality all of us have to face. Now, coming back to this issue. Sorry,
Chun,
yes, Ruben,
do you
please,
mind
yes,
if I just
sure,
come
please.
in very quickly here?
Sure, yes.
And answer the question of quantification and implementation by Graciela. If I can just answer that very quickly. Sure. I mean, we did two things there. So on implementation, we engage with stakeholders and policymakers from the beginning and throughout the process. Mm-hmm. They understand fully where we're coming from, what the analysis is, what it's made up of, what the data points that we had, and our analytical engine. So that was described with them. They understand also the international benchmarks as mentioned. Yeah. So that's one way in which you build that buy-in that then allows policymakers also to be better equipped when they're discussing with other stakeholders that are fundamental also for that process, private entities. But they also need to be fully equipped with what's happening elsewhere in the world. What's the competition lens working on this? On the quantification side, we have done a quantification exercise for the ASEAN-wide recommendations that we've made. We had this $4.5 billion US dollars per year just on lower consumer prices, but with many more knock-on effects going on. Why do we only do that? Well, data points. There was a lot of issues obtaining data. We could only obtain data for 2 or 3 items, and in some 2 or 3 countries. Malaysia actually was one of the countries where you had some data, but only for some of the recommendations and not for everything. It was quite difficult to complete. So we invite either Malaysia with us or on their own to undertake that analysis as well, if in case it's needed to take this to the next level. But we believe that what we've offered is already a very robust response or suggestions for change that can really make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to move on to this subject, which I think that a lot of the Malaysian media has asked me to point this out when I conduct this discussion. It was brought up by Ruben much earlier. Obviously, that Malaysia still has very good standing on the international market and in ASEAN. But of course, Malaysia is a bit concerned at our current positioning. Malaysia ranks 41 out of the 160 countries in the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, the LPI, a drop from 25 in 2014 and 32 in 2016, when it was the second best performing ASEAN country after Singapore, with the overall LPI score of 3.22 in 2018 and its rank of 41. It was behind ASEAN countries, including Singapore, which is number 7, Thailand 32, and Vietnam 39. What has Malaysia not done or has not done enough for us to take a drop in the numbers? I'd like to pose these questions to Michael Teo, Ruben, and then Datuk Haji Muhammad Jamal. Obviously, as Malaysian, we are all very concerned as to why we have taken the drop in the ranking, what the reasons for it, and what we can do to improve ourselves. Perhaps we can start off with Michael Teo as industry player. What you have seen which resulted in this dropping, and what you think ought to be done for us, for Malaysia to climb up again?
First of all, you have to know Logistics Performance Index is used by investor to do the evaluation whether we are capable of doing logistics for them or not. This data must be used for somebody, all right? So if the government were to know that this data is used by investor as an evaluation to invest in Malaysia so that they can have their goods distributed at a cheap and efficient, not only cheap, but also efficient, then the government will know what to do. Because my take is this KPI do not belong to anybody. So if the government were to decide that, oh, we need to climb up the KPI to become at least below Singapore in the 20-ish ranking, there is a target set by the government, and then we give this target to one ministry. Because in Malaysia, when you want to do something, you want to get licensing issue, want to change certain regulation related to logistics, you have to go to 5 ministries to do that. So because of that, there is a lot of inefficiency, and that is why we are low in the ranking. Not only that, I think recently we have come across the MyCC cases about investing into software for internet communication for EDI and whatnot for our documentation and custom brokerage. The investment did not realized. Okay, so we were supposed to be already fully computerized our EDI, our custom brokerage. No need to have a face-to-face with the custom officers, which is happening in other countries, especially in neighboring countries down in Singapore. So easy. So, but then again, we still have that inefficiency. And because of that, we are being ranked quite poorly. I think Ruben just mentioned that we are quite well ranking 20-something in terms of infrastructure. This is true. Malaysia have a best infrastructure in ASEAN. The connectivity is amazing. Okay, and then we have, in terms of our port, we have reached all over the world, and even our airport as well with Asia, Asia, within the ASEAN reach is there already. So then the only problem is nobody's KPI, this one. If somebody were to take up that as their KPI, and they were given a task to reduce that number from 41 to 25 by within 2 years or 3 years, I'm sure we can achieve that, because it is only a matter of focusing and implementation, because nobody want to focus and implement, because when you talk about some changes in the customs and whatnot, we have to talk to 5 ministry. So how are we going to do it? So we need to create one-stop center, somebody which is really responsible and make the action and report to the Prime Minister themselves itself, so that it will happen. Because I believe we have the formula, or we have the infrastructure, we have the capability to be just below Singapore. Okay, but then nobody is looking into it because it is not anybody's KPI at all.
Mike, I have got a follow-up question. Obviously, we know that Singapore has always been very good at what they do. That's why it's number 2. But why is it that Vietnam has overtaken us in Malaysia?
Because of KPI, because of one-stop center, because of, actually they learned from us, Vietnam. Okay, Vietnam, a long time ago, they learned from our Malaysian government how we implement one-stop center. So one-stop center is the center that look into all the investment that come into Vietnam, and every one of their problems is solved by one-stop center. But if we don't have one-stop center in Malaysia, whenever the investor come in, they have to go and solve up their problem themselves. Then they will end up talking to 5 ministries just to get one approval. So it is very tough. So that is why I say that we have to go back and then look into the formula, how we're going to solve this, recreate the one-stop center thingy, and then so that every investor got any issue, talk to one person, not 5 ministries. So this is how I think Vietnam is better than us in terms of that. But in terms of the protection side, you know, we are still very, very much protecting our local industry, which is, to me, not necessary at all, because we already in a position to become the next hub taking over from Singapore, and we are not doing anything to do it to make sure that it happened. So what we are seeing here is a bonus that they still come to us because we have a very good infrastructure, but then the rest is still a problem to us. So if we can clear up our problems and move the ranking to 20 plus, or even 10 over the years, below Singapore, I'm sure Malaysia will become the ASEAN logistics hub.
Dr. Jamal, I think you want to say something, right? Yeah, please.
And I just that to that actually when they measure the LPI, Logistic Performance Index, I think they are based on the 6 criteria.
Okay.
I think we should look at the criteria and see where can Malaysia improve.
Yeah.
For example, they are about timeliness, they are talking about port infrastructure, they are talking about the speed of business. I think I forgot that the 3, but
6. Yeah.
If you look at that criteria, if we can tackle that criteria individually, even without the one-stop agency, if we can do that, I think we can improve the position from 25th somewhere in 2007, hovering around 32, 36, 25, 39, and 41 in 2000. The last figure, 2018. I think that actually a cause for concern for us. Actually, I would agree with Datuk Sulaiman that there's something should be done to this LPI, or rather the action to be taken in order to increase the performance of this LPI. Thank you.
Okay, in the follow-up to what Dr. Jamal has said, the 6th index that was mentioned by the World Bank in its report is that this is according to the weightage for the country's points, in scoring. So we lost out obviously in terms of efficiency, speed, simplicity, and predictability of clearance processes by border control agencies. For example, customs. It's mentioned here, customs. 2, quality of trade and transport-related infrastructure. Number 3, ease of arranging competitively priced shipments. Number 4, competence and quality of logistics services, such as transport operators and customs brokers. Number 5, ability to track and trace consignments. And 6, timeliness of shipments arriving within the scheduled or expected delivery time. So these 6 criteria, as the Dato Jamal mentioned, has what affected us. Perhaps Mr. Ruben, you can expand on this because that you sort of like your body draw this up. Please, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Let me just say, this is a competitive game, so other countries are not staying quiet. So you've done a great job so far. You've done a lot of investments. You have world-class infrastructure, as mentioned by Michael Teo. But now you need to continue to improve, and perhaps. The history perhaps was, let's have a strong logistics sector. Let's protect our operators so that they can grow and they can learn and they can get some scale and know-how of how to undertake these logistics sectors. Perhaps now it's time to move to the next phase, which is a phase where you're introducing more competition because you're now ready for it. And that's what will allow you to, reinvigorate your industry and allow to extract the most efficiency possible out of your world-class logistics infrastructure. So, not staying. Other countries have not stayed in the same place. I think is the major answer to that, and that Malaysia needs to do that change as well. I think now is a moment. There's quite an impulse for reform because of the COVID crisis. And it's not just that impulse is not just here. It's not just in Malaysia, it'll be elsewhere. So let me give you an example. Indonesia was looking at its foreign direct investment rules. And it decided to make some changes that we had proposed in our recommendations for Malaysia in some of their their port services. So they're continuing to improve, and Malaysia needs to do the same. So I think if you look at our recommendations and our work, and if you compare it with some of the aspects that you mentioned from that global ranking, the efficiency of seaport services is quite high. Efficiency of train services needs to be improved, etc. So we believe that our recommendations can help to move in the direction of moving up the rankings. Of course, they'll need to be, that needs to become a priority. That's not for us to decide. That's for Malaysia to determine on its own whether this is a priority and to what extent it's a priority. It probably has many different competing priorities. So it's not for us to make that even advice on that. What we advise is if you wish, one way in which you can make the logistics sector more competitive with so many knock-on effects across the world, across the economy in Malaysia, is really to look at regulation, make it more pro-competitive, make it more easier for competition to take place and for you to reap the benefits of lower prices, lower delivery times, more innovation. That's what we're hoping that Malaysia will look into at some point, but it's really up for Malaysia to decide when and how to do that.
Absolutely, Ruben. Ruben, you mentioned about the Indonesian case. When I look at the table, of course, Malaysia is down at 41 now, but not far from behind is Indonesia, which is at number 46. In the past, we never imagined that Malaysia will be beaten by Thailand or Vietnam. Now we have this situation that they've overtaken Malaysia, but not far from behind, of course, is Indonesia now. We cannot be looking at our back all the time. Michael, as an industry player, how do Malaysia stack with Indonesia, for example, given the fact that everybody will go all out to overtake you? That's the reality. It doesn't matter what country you're in, everybody aspires to overtake you. What would be something that Malaysia has that Indonesian do not have, and what do they have in terms of taking away from Malaysia?
You see, the thing here is I was involved with a study by Pelindo, Pelabuhan Indonesia. So when Jokowi took over as the president of Indonesia, he has envisions Indonesia to increase the FDI into Indonesia. And one of the major cause of the problem for the FDI into Indonesia is their logistics costs. So and also infrastructure. We were very lucky because in Indonesia at that time, it's very difficult to acquire land. Like Malaysia, when we want to build highway, we just acquire the land compulsory, and government just compensate the landowner. But in Indonesia, they have many laws, and the land is very difficult to acquire. As a result, then the infrastructure take time for them to build. But then looking at the Pelindo idea, they were going to build about 5 or 6 ports along the whole Selat Melaka to capture the market share from us in the near future. So I would say that you are right. They are not sitting there doing nothing. They know what's their problem. They know why they are not getting FDI, because the logistics cost is just too high. It is heavily congested in the port of Indonesia. For you to do delivery to Tanjung Priok, you only can do after certain hours, and that restrict logistics movement. So an international player don't like that because they like to do GIT and whatnot. Okay, so then we are in ahead. But then if we don't do anything about our logistics performance index, one day they will definitely catch up with us. Okay, and like what happened in Vietnam, which their government are able to implement new rules and regulation to change the country fast. So we will be looking at a hard time to chase after Vietnam more, because strategically, if you look into the whole routes for the international routes is actually coming from Suez Canal through the Selat Melaka down south, and then turn to the right towards China side. Okay, and of course they will stop in Ho Chi Minh as one of the major ports. So the major threat will be Vietnam from my point of view in the next 10 years, because Indonesia will still take time for them to build their infrastructure, especially when I talk about the acquisition of land. So I would say that we need to be competitive. We need to stay. We need to be focused. Our government need to make a decision today after the recommendation that you need to open up, because in order for us to compete with Singapore, basically we need to behave like Singapore. All right. So if there is no barrier in Singapore of entry, then there shouldn't be barrier. But then again, I also want to remind our Malaysian logistics industry players, okay, don't forget to move up the value chain, because these international players, they are not doing the 3PL or the custom brokerage and forwarding, that's all, because that is low value to them. So they are doing the whole spectrum of logistics, not only 3PL, but 4PL, 5PL, 6PL, and 7PL. Can you imagine Malaysia is only 3PL when Singapore is already 7PL? So we are very far, and that is why we can't even compete with them, given the fact their land price is more than 10 to 20 times higher than Malaysia. And the cost of living is more than 3 times Malaysia, but they still can compete with us until today. Why? Because they are doing high value business. We are doing low value business. So we need to move up the value chain as well.
Michael, when you say high value business, what are you referring to?
Okay, because just now that Dato Jamal was saying that we are regulating the custom brokerage division, haulage division, warehousing business, freight forwarding business. But most of the MNC logistics provider, they provide the full spectrum of business.
Okay.
So when you compete competition with somebody who offer to the customer full spectrum of the business, and you only offer one single logistics.
Right.
So your single logistics price cannot be as competitive as somebody who provide the total logistics services. So that is why Malaysian logistics industry also need to do a bit of consolidation so that we have more and more total logistics player. When the MNC logistics provider come in and provide 3PL, 4PL, 5PL services, then we are able to compete with them.
Okay, I will move on to the next question, which is related. I will need a quick response because that time is catching up on me. Now, obviously, for Malaysia, the competition is out there, not only just in ASEAN, but also the world. In terms of competition, in Malaysia, I think these questions will be something that Dr. Michael and Dr. Jamal can answer. One issue that has cropped up in Malaysia is the issue of ownership and equity, specifically the question of affirmative action, the requirement of 51% ownership for customs brokerage license is a contentious issue, but it's also it's only a 200 million business, okay, compared to the big market pie that we need to protect and to enlarge. How do we handle contentious issues of this nature? Obviously, for me, we need to look at the larger picture, the big picture, because the competition is out there, and even in ASEAN we have dropped. Do we want to focus the attention and the resources on smaller issues like this? Dr. Jamal, and first, your take, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shong.
Yeah.
In fact, the issue of 51% equity was raised quite recently again in the local newspapers. I think 2 or 3 newspapers.
Yeah.
In fact, this ruling actually was implemented by the government ever since 1970s. In fact, if I want to go back to the history, it started with the so-called May 69 events. I think I won't go into that history.
Yeah.
But that was the starting point for the government to change, to have this policy whereby to have the local Bumitra. Bumitra doesn't mean Malays only, but includes also those native people from Sabah and Sarawak. So please don't get misunderstood with the notion of Bumitra equal to Malays. No. But in any case, I think the association has appealed to the Ministry of Finance to extend this brokerage license equity until end of this year. But I remember, if not mistaken, I think they have extended to next year, 2022. But anyway, this is under the view of Ministry of Finance. I think in our report, in the MyCC report of the market report, I think we mentioned that this thing will have to be looked into by the relevant authorities. I think I suffice me to say that I think we have raised the issue. I think the people have raised the issue. The public and the players have raised the issue. I think we hope that the relevant authority will consider the implication, the competition, and so on for the people to move for the industry to move forward. Just my comment.
Thank you. Michael, short one, please.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, the custom brokerage issue has been the issue that everyone talking about, including Jamal. You came up with the article last Sunday, Okay. Basically, we need to look at the big picture. I'm sure our colleagues, panel speaker here, Graciela and also Ruben, will say that, oh, it's a no-no under this study, which I heard Ruben was announcing it just now, which is true in a way that we should be considering to liberalize the logistics industry. We should follow what Singapore is doing. But if you understand correctly, custom brokerage company, they need to employ a licensed custom broker. Now, licensed custom broker, this license, they need to take exam for it. So this exam is conducted by Customs in collaboration with UUM, University Utara Malaysia. So you already have UUM selecting the licensed custom broker who come and study, you can limit that licensed custom broker to certain percentage of Bumiputra, because they are the big numbers that is going to work in the custom brokerage companies. So like Singapore as well, in order for you to do custom brokerage in Singapore, you go online, you set it up, blah, blah, blah. Then they want you to name who is your licensed custom broker. So then you get a few licensed custom broker, you add it in, then after that, they get you approved. But if you look at it, custom brokerage itself is not logistics, okay? Custom brokerage itself is only a single logistics, and it is low value. So we have to look into the big picture here. I think, Chun Wai, you have rightfully said the potential Malaysian growth in the logistics industry is tremendous. We are looking at moving from 50 over billions to 180 billions by the year 2030, given the fact that if logistics contribution, GDP contribution compared to Singapore now is 8%, if we can manage to move that 3.8% to 8% by 2030, then we are looking at 180 billion. So it's a very big figure. So I think this is a very small issue. I think government will look into it, and hopefully they will make the right decision.
Okay, I've got two questions from followers who are watching this program. One, I think, is for Ruben. How can OECD work together with MyCC in helping each other for both OECD reports to be implemented? What would be the process? And then the second one, I think, is more for Michael. What benefits does these three reports bring to the public? I think that they've been listening to us for more than 1 hour. They're probably wondering, well, how does it benefit them? Okay, so we start off with Ruben. Okay.
Yeah, if I can say a little bit just on that question as well, is essentially, it will reduce prices for consumers so that there'll be more trade that leads to more jobs and more growth. In essence, that's what we are looking at. That's what the empirical evidence of more competition in this field would suggest. Now, to go to your, sorry to preempt, but that would be my view on it as well. On the, but maybe there's other views. On the, how can the OECD help? I mean, we stand ready to help on the implementation side. We've working very intensely with MyCC over the last year and a half or so, since we've been engaging with Malaysia on this topic, even 2 years now. So we, looking forward to continue to working with MyCC. MyCC doesn't hold the pen here. It's for the legislators to hold the pen. So it's a work of advocacy that needs to be done to advocate for change by showing them that there's benefits to be done for policymakers to make that change. They might have other priorities, etc., but it's for the competition authority, in this case MyCC, and the OECD stands ready to support MyCC to help to make that case. These two reports are a good basis. These three reports, I would say, are a good basis for going to policymakers and suggesting change along the lines of the recommendations the three reports make. So the answer is we stand ready to help.
Thank you. A quick one from Michael, please.
Yeah, talking about the benefit for publics. Basically, this is the first time we are being so open about logistics industry. Okay, we actually very, very protecting, and we don't want to talk about it because it has a lot of licensing issue and whatnot. And we don't want, I mean, being a Malaysian businessman, we normally don't talk about it. We just manage it, that's all. So, but then again, now we have World Bank and OECD willing to come in and then tell us what is the problem with us. It's not that we do not know, guys. We know what's going on, but we thank OECD and also the World Bank for openly telling that this is our problem and that we need to solve it. Hopefully, our politicians and our associations and our MyCC will look into it, and then hopefully the consumer will benefit from it, because open competition means more players in the market, and then the price will come down. I'm open for that. I'm willing to compete, because I know without opening up, Malaysia cannot take over Singapore as the next regional hub. That's for sure. We're going to miss out that 180 billion cake that Chun mentioned in the article. I think that is a very big case. So everyone will definitely benefit from it. Government can come up with another idea how to help the Bumiputra, I'm sure. So okay. I would say that the public have to thank OECD and World Bank for taking this initiative, and also MyCC to actually willing to publish this report and talk about it in this panel talk, which before this, very difficult to talk about it.
Okay, but I'm not going to let you guys go off so fast. There's still one more item that we need to tackle, and this is the hard work by OECD, okay? This is about the small package delivery systems in Malaysia. And it's really of interest to me, really, when I read this report, because we're talking about Universal Service Obligation Fund to help providers like Post Malaysia, okay, like in Malaysia, because they are regarded as the Universal Service Obligation USO provider. And in the case of other countries, even publisher gets to enjoy this kind of benefit. And coming from the media, I would want MyCC to recommend that perhaps that this fund would include publishers like newspaper, for example, so we could benefit from it. Okay, this is basically a general question that perhaps that Dr. Graciela or Ruben could answer, because that in many of these countries, because that the universal provider, the USO, they are suffering in terms of businesses. Their main revenue, like mails and letters, postage, have been overtaken in many ways. So they have to move on to logistics as well. They have moved on to other kind of a business, but it's a very tough business. They need to oblige to serve the public, and yet at the same time, like Post Malaysia, they need to earn revenue as a public listed company. That's one. Second thing is that in terms of digitalization, obviously, like for example, in the Portuguese government, they are very strong in making sure that digitalization is carried out. So they cut away the layers of human contacts, the possible layers of abuses. Like what Michael said, less contact with the customs, for example, or the enforcement agencies. So let's start with the first one. We are talking about the USO and the Universal Service Obligation Fund. Can Ruben perhaps share with us in Europe, Portugal, in Italy, do they have these rules? How do they work?
Yes, so they are those universal service funds that you in different industries, not just in logistics, but also, or rather in small package delivery services, which is what we're talking about here, but also in other areas of telecommunications, of communications. You see that in the US, you see that in Poland and in other jurisdictions. There's these sorts of funds that are up and running and helping to fund the universal service obligations. Another thing that we also see is that often for universal service obligations, there's a tender process. So you can actually ensure that you're getting the most competitive possible product and price, as well as by doing a sort of a tendering process. In the context of Malaysia and what we're talking about now here today on a competitive neutrality report that we looked at, I mean, you have a legacy situation. So POS Malaysia has before it was privatized, let's say, it was already the universal service obligation provider, and therefore it still has quite a few number of years to run, a couple of decades to run before that service obligation runs out. Now, I know that there's discussion in Malaysia about whether to tender out further service universal obligation providers. We don't have any particular recommendation on that at this point. What we do say is that it's important that the universal service obligation is paid for the costs it incurs. So it's not getting more and it's not getting less. If it gets more, it can cross-subsidize the market where it's protected, where it's the only player that's playing, that's there, and it can use those profits to fund competition against private entities in another market, in the small package delivery services market. And that basically distorts the market. That's the unleveling the playing field, because the private entities that are active on this market that's open to competition don't have the same ability to have cross-subsidization from a market that's protected as the universal service obligation company has. So one way of doing that is paying it from making that analysis regularly, ensuring that there's transparent accounting, so you know exactly what the costs are that are being incurred for the service that you're providing in competition, the small package delivery services for e-commerce, and the postal services that are protected under this universal service obligation. So you need to have those costs. Where those costs come from, it differs. Some jurisdictions, countries, the state pays directly from the budget those costs because it's considered to be a service of public interest. It's providing these services to regions that perhaps otherwise it wouldn't be profitable for a private entity to provide. So you need to provide a sort of a markup to provide those services. That might be taken from the budget directly, or you can have, if you have several universal service providers or several players, you can actually have a fund. So it depends. The system depends on what you have in place. If you have several players, you might have a fund in place that could be used to pay for that. Or if you only have one option is the budget option, which is what the one Malaysia currently has. The important thing here is to make sure that you're not overcompensating.
Dr. Graciela, just one final question for you. In terms of...
If I may, before the
please.
final question, I would like to echo Ruben's point. It's very important. This is something that I like a lot from the competitive neutrality report of the OECD. And this question of compensating and not overcompensating, but also not undercompensating. Because what we are seeing in other countries in the region is that universal service providers, especially in the postal sector, they typically are undercompensated, and they are struggling to be able to deliver on their universal provision of services, especially in countries where it's very difficult to ensure that. And I think that I would like to mention this because I think this is a very important point that connects with the relevance of separating commercial and non-commercial activities, because only when you properly separate commercial and non-commercial activities, you can ensure that you are not either compensating or undercompensating or overcompensating. But it's a very, very important point.
Thank you, Graciela, for bringing that point. I think it's very pertinent because many of these universal service provider, they have to service the rural areas, which does not bring them any strong revenues. And there's always this need to have a cross compensation and finding the right and the middle path that you do not overpay them and not underpay them. And I think that's a very crucial point. Dr. Graciela, I also like to talk about digitalization. Obviously, it's very crucial for this logistics sector in terms of showing transparency, cutting down barriers, cutting down layers. Give us your view on the need for digitalization for the sector.
I mean, clearly, can you hear me? Yeah. Clearly, digitalization is absolutely critical for this sector and for the other sectors. And many countries are undertaking very large expenses in order to make automation a reality. Automation is not only a question of the outside, but also on the inside. I mean, we need to think about both with the automation within the authorities and automation in the relationship of the authorities with the public. And for sure, some of the examples that are brought in the report, such as the Portuguese example or even the Australian example, I mean, are very relevant. But I would like to get back to my initial point, which is the feasibility to implement those type of reforms in Malaysia. I think here, by all means, one of the most important contributions, I believe, of these reports are how they bring a wealth of experiences and examples from other countries to deal with these issues, especially digitalization, such as the example of Portugal. But the question is, these examples need to be adapted to the realities of Malaysian markets. and also the cost of what it would imply. So for sure, there is no doubt that automation and digitalization would be a tremendous help to make the processes and the exchanges and communications more efficient. But at the same time, we need to see from a feasibility perspective to what extent something like that can be implemented, and then to think about the roadmap for implementation. I think if I would want to leave with one key idea from my perspective is implementation. And how to bring these excellent reports to reality, and how to make the markets work better thanks to all those analytics.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this program. We will do a rotation, and of course, the lady will have the last word. Okay, we will start off with Dr. Jamal as the first person.
Okay, if you look at the three reports, the two by OECD and one by MyCC, I think I would say that these reports actually focus on the competition environment.
Yeah.
I think we augurs well for the future. And for MyCC, I think what we are doing now is that we will be looking into the reports and possibly liaise with even OECD, Mr. Ruben, and also with other relevant government agencies to look into ways and mean to how to tackle the issues that has been mentioned in the report, and how we move forward towards that. I think that's the way forward for MyCC actually, to discuss within ourselves, within the board members on this report, and then to the other ministries and agency, and possibly even to the cabinet.
Yes.
That is a way forward for us. I think that's I can say, Datuk Seri.
Thank you so much. Ruben, please.
Thank you. And I think it's a great pleasure to be on the panel. And so final words, but I would just say that, we do believe that this could bring these reports, and these three reports can bring significant value to the Malaysian economy. It can bring growth at a time when, growth is so needed to recover from the pandemic. So I think they're very timely. They were not done in that context. They were prepared beforehand, but they, in the end, can provide a low-cost regulatory solution, or part of the solution to that economic recovery. So again, I would like to underline as well the complementarity of these three reports. They tackle different issues within logistics, and together they're a very strong package that I hope does get implemented. And in that point, I would just, to the point of Graciela, which is so important, implementation should be the next three words. We stand ready to help Malaysia to help designing that roadmap. We've been approached already by some countries in ASEAN following launches, and to do that, and we stand ready to do that for Malaysia as well. So looking forward to that, those three words.
Thank you. Thank you. Ruben, there's Michael Teo, please.
Yeah, I think for the industrial players, I would ask them to move up the value chain now. Don't look into the old methods of doing logistics. You have to move out the value chain, 3PL, 4PL, 5PL, 6PL, and 7PL. Look into it. If you don't know how to do it, go for joint venture, find foreign partners, joint venture with them. That is how knowledge are transferred between one company to another, one player to another player. So Malaysian government should allow joint venture company to be able to happen. I mean, MYCC to look at it as a joint venture is not really anti-monopoly, anti-competition. Joint venture is actually to help us to gain more knowledge, to get ourselves ready for the big competition that is going to happen. Okay, and also invest into the manpower and training. Don't forget that education is very important. Malaysia wants to become the next ASEAN hub. Just like that, no way. We need to actually come up with a lot of graduates in logistics related subjects. So our government need to talk to each other, one ministry to another ministry, maybe trade and transport, and talk to the Ministry of Education and say that get ready, because if we're going to open up, then there will be a big movement of logistics coming into Malaysia. And with this big movement, you need to provide enough human capital to take over this, to get the jobs. I mean, to match together with industry, because we are very good in mismatching the industry, so then our graduate cannot get a job. So now is the right time. We are now talking about opening up. the big movement will happen. And then if it's happening, so we need to have the supply of human resources to make it happen.
Okay. Dr. Graciela, the floor is all yours. Here. Here's it.
Well, I almost had already delivered the final word, but let me capture one idea that Ruben mentioned in the very beginning of the panel, which is in times of crisis, when there might be a doubt of the role of competition, what these reports show actually is that competition can be the catalyzer for more productivity and economic growth in the logistics sectors and in general in all the other sectors that have been hit hard by the crisis. So that would be the most important thing. This actually contributes to make a point on the relevance of competition policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Graciela, I really I know that after spending 1.5 hours here with the esteemed panelists, I think tonight when I have a dream, it will be competition, logistics.
I'm really glad.
I really appreciate the good work put up by OECD. Reading those reports actually educated me and to make me understand the industry better, perhaps 80%, but it made me appreciate the good work done by OECD and of course MyCC. Great job that you guys have done, and coming and producing this report so professionally and so easy to digest for me. I thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Dr. Mohd Jamal, Ruben, Dr. Graciela, and Dr. Michael Thiel, and to all Malaysians and to all for our viewers around the world who are watching this. Thank you so much. Goodbye and stay safe. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
There was an interesting panel discussion, very detailedly discussed on their takeaways. So thank you so much to the panel. Now on to the closing for the launching of the OECD reports for today. Let's invite Mr. Lui Teck Kiong, Head of Competition, Consumer Protection and IPR Division, Asian Secretariat, to deliver his closing remark.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dato Sri Hasnul Zamzam Ahmad, Secretary General, Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs. Mr. Iskandar Ismail, Chief Executive Officer, Malaysia Competition Commission. Mr. Antonio Gomes, Deputy Director, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs, OECD. Dato Sri Wong Chun Wai, State Media Group Advisor. Distinguished panelists, Dr. Haji Muhammad Jamal, Dr. Graciela Miralles Murciego, Datuk Sri Dr. Michael Thiel, and Mr. Ruben Maximiano. Good afternoon, Selamat Petang from Jakarta. I'm very pleased to join you today in the launching of Malaysia's Competition Assessment Review on Logistics Sector and the Competitive Neutrality Review on Small Package Delivery Services. The project is an initiative under Outcome 4.1.2 and 4.2.1 of the ASEAN Competition Action Plan 2025, which serves to assess the impacts on competition in the markets relating to non-tariff barriers, the state-owned enterprises and government-linked companies of ASEAN member states. The initiative falls under Strategic Goal 4, which aims to foster a competition-aware ASEAN region. Malaysia's country report is part of ASEAN Regional Project in cooperation with the OECD, which produces 10 country reports and 1 regional report for each reviews. Beyond its immediate impact on competition policy, the project provides recommendations to reduce inequality, lower non-tariff barriers to trade, and improve the business environment and ease of doing business in ASEAN's logistics sector. Competition policy and law is considered vital to the process of ASEAN liberalization. Promoting fair competition is a collaborative effort, not only as the responsibility of competition authorities, but also sector regulators and other relevant stakeholders, including SOEs. This study complements ASEAN's efforts to ensure that the ASEAN markets are kept open to new entrants and that anti-competitive behavior does not distort fair competition. Improving the logistics sector is vital as it allows economic growth to be optimized and strengthens the allocation of scarce resources. Recognizing its importance in 2006, the logistics sector has been placed as the 12th priority sector by the ASEAN economic ministers, in addition to the 11 priority sectors that were identified in 2003. As reiterated in the two reports, the logistics sector plays a significant role in fostering economic development. An efficient logistics system can improve a country's competitiveness, facilitate international trade, and enhance its connectivity to better serve consumers and meet the needs of regionally integrated production facilities for reliable delivery of inputs and outputs. In this unprecedented time, the COVID-19 pandemic, fair competition in the logistics sector would significantly support the health sector as well as e-commerce. The 63 recommendations made on the logistics sector in general and 15 recommendations are competitively neutrality presented today by Mr. Ruben Maximiano are expected to stimulate discussions among the relevant regulators and stakeholders to improve the level of playing field in the logistics sector. The discussion, moderated by Dato Seri Wong has brought the various perspectives of key stakeholders in the logistics sector of Malaysia. It is hoped that this discussion will initiate further dialogue and consideration on the necessary reforms to improve competition and business environment of the logistics sector in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, I should commend the Malaysia Competition Commission for its leadership in guiding and supporting the undertaking and completion of this comprehensive report. It is hoped that both reports could be beneficial for Malaysia in ensuring fair competition in the logistics sector. I'd also like to congratulate Malaysia for launching their Malaysian domestic competition reports in selected sectors of the transportation system. And as Mr. Antonio Gomez pointed out, it would also complement the OECD Priority Assessment Competition Report. At the regional level, the ASEAN expert groups on competition have agreed to implement significant reforms toward market liberalization and elimination of competition distortion as part of our action plan. I'd like to express my gratitude to the OECD and the UK government for the support rendered. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Mr. Louis. Finally, let's also have Mr. Iskandar Ismail, Chief Executive Officer of MyCC, to wrap up the session for today. Let's welcome Mr. Iskandar.
Very good afternoon to everybody. Yang bahagia Datuk Seri Hasnul Zamzam, Secretary General Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, Mr. Antonio Gomez, Deputy Director, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs, OECD, Mr. Lee Teck Kyong, Head of Competition, Consumer Protection and IPR Division, ASEAN Secretariat, Officers of Malaysia Competition Commission, OECD colleagues, distinguished members and Secretariat of the ASEAN Expert Group on Competition, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We have reached the end of the launching event. I'm sure that all of you have greatly benefited from the thought-provoking panel discussion earlier that drilled down the measures required to fostering competition in the logistics and transportation sector. For that, I would like to express my appreciation to Yang Bahagia Datuk Seri Hasnul Zamzam Ahmad, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, especially to Mr. Antonio Gomez, and to the ASEAN Secretariat, notably Mr. Lee Teck Kyong, the moderator, and all the panelists involved for their valuable time and contribution to this launching event. My deepest gratitude goes also to who attended today and helped to make it such a wonderful and successful event. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our lives in unprecedented ways, and the uncertainty brought upon by the pandemic has led us to a new and unpredictable challenges. Likewise, the logistic and transportation sectors have also experienced other forms of disruptions. This includes the increasing pace of digitalization, new technologies, emerging business models, and a shift in the consumer priorities. However, not all subsectors have been impacted equally by the pandemic. For example, subsectors that are involved in e-commerce are seen to have increased in activities as consumers now opt for online shopping on essential and non-essential items. While those that serve other sectors such as automotive and tourism industries have seen a downturn. Even in Malaysia, the shift from traditional retail to online shopping are accelerating at a fast pace. The demand on e-logistic and last mile logistic have indefinitely increased. These developments will have profound implications for regulators. Competition authorities, including MyCC, are mindful of these complex challenges and at the same time committed to foster a conducive business environment so as to ensure the continuance of innovation and the growth of Malaysia's economy for the benefit for its consumers. In his opening key, the Secretary General of the Ministry spoke about the importance of enhancing competition while protecting the functioning of the markets and consumer interests. He further emphasized that reforms in terms of competition, such as regulatory barriers and market entry would be key for innovation, productivity, and efficiency of the markets. I would like also to reference the same spirits. This demonstrates the importance of a coordinated approach towards sustainable economic growth and consumer at large. For that reason, this event has exposed us with well-argued discussion as well as intriguing information, which includes recommendations on the problem found in these sectors. We could not be happier to have launched this virtual event with OECD despite the challenges that we face in the midst of this pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, have no doubt that this event will not be the last collaboration between MyCC and OECD in promoting and fostering the competition spirit. MyCC will always look forward to working closely with the OECD at any time. Kudos also to the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, who has given its support to the completion of the reviews. I would like to thank the stakeholders involved in materializing these two reviews. Its success may have not been achieved without the comments and feedback from the stakeholders. Your utmost support and participation towards the project are greatly appreciated. My greatest gratitude also goes to my team or MyCC team who has assisted in the completion of this project. Before I end my speech, I would like to thank all of you again for attending this event. I sincerely believe that the discussion and knowledge shared in this event would be beneficial to all the relevant industry players in these sectors and the consumers as well. Lastly, I wish each of you will stay in good health always. Thank you so much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Iskandar. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's event. If you missed the session, do not worry. You can always check the recordings on MyCC's official YouTube and Facebook page. Awesome. With that, if you are also joining, and it was a pleasure having all of you on this event. And until then, this is Tivia signing off.
Okay, gentlemen.